On September 12, 1862, Stonewall Jackson lays siege to the garrison at Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. He carefully places his artillery for maximum effect from positions both in front of and in the rear of the Federal forces. By the 15th, Colonel Miles realizes he is surrounded. Outmanned 2-1 and with no relief in sight, he holds a meeting with his subordinates where it is decided to surrender. As this map by the American Battlefield Trust illustrates, A.P. Hill had his Light Division perform a flanking maneuver that sealed the fate of the Union forces on Bolivar Heights. The performance of Hill's Light Division was instrumental in securing Stonewall Jackson's easy victory at Harper's Ferry. But in the coming days, they would play a much more important role for the Army of Northern Virginia. Following the Union surrender on the 15th, Lee ordered Jackson to join him at Sharpsburg, Maryland, near Antietam Creek. Jackson will leave A.P. Hill and his Light Division at Harper's Ferry to collect 13,000 small arms, 73 pieces of artillery, and reportedly 200 wagon loads of supplies. At 6:30 a.m. on the morning of the 17th, Hill receives an urgent message from Lee to join the army at Sharpsburg immediately. This order will initiate one of the most historically important and grueling marches in American Civil War history. Living in an area close to Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and being an avid motorcyclist for many years, I love old back roads, and Bakerton Road was one of my favorite haunts. Bakerton terminates at Engel Mollers Road, with the Bethesda United Methodist Church located on the left, and in the grassy area by the parking lot is a history marker. Having passed by it many times, I finally stopped one day to see what it said, and what I read simply amazed me. It stated that Bakerton Road was part of the route that A.P. Hill's Light Division used to get to Antietam. This animated map shows the complete route of the march, but you will have to turn left on River Road and go to Shepherdstown, West Virginia, then cross the river and turn right on Canal Road on the Maryland side of the river just over the bridge, unless of course you do a mean backstroke. Early in the morning on the 17th, A.P. Hill will leave Harper's Ferry using a back road that follows the Potomac River in order to lead his division for the march. I will be starting the Baker Road portion of the ride at the Harper's Ferry campground. In order for you to appreciate just how difficult this march was, I have used Google Earth to obtain the vertical elevations of the hills the Light Division would have had to have climbed on their way to Antietam, which will be displayed on screen. My purpose for making this video is to point out just how incredible a feat of human endurance the march was. My way of staying fit my entire life has been walking and hiking, and I thought I was capable of making some pretty strenuous hikes. That is until I began studying just what the Light Division had accomplished. There are 10 elevations posted along the ride totaling 828 feet. That's the equivalent of using the steps at the New World Trade Center in New York City to reach the top floor, or climbing to the top of the Washington Monument 1.5 times. The figure of 828 feet is undoubtedly low since I did not bother pointing out smaller hills with less than 10 feet of rise. Add to this fact that each soldier was carrying a rifle weighing more than 10 pounds, an ammunition pouch, water canteen, blanket, and other miscellaneous personal items, and you have the makings of one grueling march. By the time they made it to the river, they probably thought the worst was over. Little did they know that Miller Sawmill Road lay just ahead. As we begin the ride, I thought I might offer a few facts concerning the logistics of the march. First of all, the length of the march, everywhere you look, including the Park Service, will state that the march was 17 miles long, and that is not correct. And it is actually about 13.5 miles. The confusion is probably due to A.P. Hill's own action report where he uses the 17-mile figure when describing the march. Secondly, how many troops started the march and how many actually arrived in time to attack Burnside's left flank? The best answer I could find came from a National Park Service ranger working the information desk at Harpers Ferry Visitor Center, no more than 3,500. As far as how many men took part in the attack when they reached Antietam battlefield, the best I came up with again was a vague answer of about 2,000. If these figures are correct, then one can assume that somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 Confederates fell out or were still on the move at the time of the attack. Thirdly, I have read that Robert E. Lee, upon seeing soldiers marching up Miller Sawmill Road, reportedly asked his aides, "Whose troops are they?" It is quite possible that Lee's question arose from the fact that some of Hill's men were wearing Union uniforms they had traded for their tattered rags from the stores captured at Harper's Ferry. I hope you are enjoying the scenery along Bakerton Road. So far, this portion of Jefferson County, West Virginia, has resisted the onslaught of property developers except for a few old communities will be passing along the Potomac River. Speaking of the Potomac, if you're quick, you will catch an occasional glimpse of the Potomac on the right side of the road. The name Potomac was derived from the tribal name of the Potomac Indians who were indigenous to Virginia. The route of the road hasn't changed from what you see now since that hot September 17th day back in 1862. With a little imagination, you can visualize Hill's Light Division trudging over what would have been a dried-out old dirt road that, unless you were in the lead, had you eating and breathing dust all the way. I've never been able to uncover any indication that Hill allowed his men to stop or eat or rest at all during the march. On the contrary, it's been said that he rode up and down the line yelling encouragement to his men while using the flat side of his sword to inspire the listless. There's a famous quote of unknown origin that goes, "History is written by the victors," and that is certainly true in many cases. Fortunately, the original reports for both sides at the Battle of Antietam have survived. I will now read selected sections of the battle reports detailing Hill's afternoon attack by Generals Hill, Burnside, Lee, and McClellan. Hopefully, after hearing these reports, you will understand just how hard it is to discern what is fact and what is embellishment. My troops are not a moment too soon. The enemy had already advanced in 3 lines, had broken through Jones' division, captured McIntosh's battery, and were in the full of success. With a yell of defiance, Archer charged them, retook McIntosh's guns, and drove them back pell-mell. Branch and Gregg, with their old veterans, sternly held their ground, and pouring in destructive volleys, those of the enemy surged back and, breaking in confusion, passed out of sight. During this attack, Pender's brigade was moved from my right to the center, but the enemy were driven back without actively engaging his brigade. The 3 brigades of my division actively engaged did not number over 2,000 men, and these, with the help of my splendid batteries, drove back Burnside's corps of 15,000 men. The Confederacy has to mourn the loss of a gallant soldier and accomplished gentleman who fell in this battle at the head of his brigade, General L.O.B. Branch of North Carolina. He was my senior brigadier and one to whom I could have trusted the command of the division with all confidence. General Gregg of South Carolina was wounded, and the brave Colonel Barnes mortally so. My gallant Captain Pegram of the artillery was also wounded for the first time. My loss was 63 killed, 283 wounded, totaling 346. We lay upon the field of battle that night until the next night at 1 o'clock, when my division was silently withdrawn and, as directed by General Lee, covered the retirement of the army. Well, as one would expect, General Hill was not exactly complimentary of Burnside's corps. While not coming right out and saying that they broke and ran, I think his comment, "the enemy passed out of sight," was a gentleman's way of putting it. Next, I will read Ambrose Burnside's report of the action, and let's see if he agrees with Hill's assessment. This order was obeyed in the most cheerful and gallant manner, the officers and soldiers moving forward with the greatest enthusiasm, driving everything before them. General Wilcox, with General Crook in support, moved up on both sides of the Sharpsburg Road and succeeded in reaching the outskirts of the village. General Rodman succeeded in carrying the main heights on the left of the town, one of his regiments, the 9th New York, capturing one of the most formidable of the enemy's batteries. But at this junction, the enemy was largely reinforced by General A.P. Hill's Light Division, which had just arrived from Harpers Ferry, and by numerous batteries from their extreme left. During the attack, General Rodman was forced to bear more to the left than was intended when the advance was ordered, and General Cox was forced to move him more to the right with a view to strengthening the line, during which movement General Rodman was mortally wounded while gallantly leading his command to the assault. At this time, Colonel Harlan's brigade was driven back, leaving the battery which they had captured. Colonel Scammon's brigade changed its front to the rear on its right, thus protecting our left flank. It was now nearly sundown. I at once ordered General Sturgis' division forward in support, and notwithstanding the hard work in the early part of the day and lack of ammunition, they moved with the greatest alacrity and enthusiasm, holding the enemy at bay and fighting him at close quarters till long after dark. It being apparent that the enemy was strongly reinforced and that we could not be reinforced, the command was ordered to fall back to the crests above the bridge, which movement was performed in the most perfect order under the cover of batteries on the height, the same formation being adopted that was made before they attacked. Receiving an order from the commanding general to hold the bridge and the heights above at any cost, this position was maintained till the enemy retreated on the morning of the 19th, during which time our skirmishers maintained a line well in advance. General Morrell's division was ordered to join me on the 18th, and to it we were much indebted for the valuable assistance rendered on the following night by relieving our line of skirmishers, thus enabling the officers and men to cook their food and obtain a night's rest. On the morning of the 19th, we were ordered in pursuit of the enemy down the road leading from our position to the mouth of the Antietam, and finding that he had succeeded in crossing the river, we were ordered into camp. General Burnside's version of Hill's attack on his left flank is certainly quite different from Hill's action report. There are several things in the report I find confusing. First, Burnside states that his men pulled back at the area above the bridge in perfect order. Most accounts I have read state that while it was not a fall-on route, the Federals wasted no time in falling back to the bridge. Secondly, Burnside says that his corps fought the Confederates at close quarters till well after dark. I have found no information to corroborate this statement, as Hill's division had made a brutal march from Harpers Ferry with no rest or food. It rings of embellishment of the situation on Burnside's part. And thirdly, if Burnside were really committed to attacking Lee, why did he march his corps to the mouth of Antietam Creek, knowing that the point at which Lee would cross the Potomac was 2.5 miles west of that point? I will now read to you an excerpt from General Robert E. Lee's action report on the final attack. General A.P. Hill arrived from Harper's Ferry, having left that place at 7:30 a.m. He was now ordered to reinforce General Jones and move to his support with the brigades of Archer, Branch, Gregg, and Pender, the last of whom was placed on the right of the line, and the other three advanced and attacked the enemy, now flushed with success. Hill's batteries were thrown forward and united their fire with those of General Jones, and one of G.H. Hill's also opened with good effect from the left of the Boonesboro Road. The progress of the enemy was immediately arrested and his lines began to waver. At this moment, General Jones ordered Toombs to charge the flank, while Archer, supported by Branch and Gregg, moved up from the front of the Federal line. The enemy made a brief resistance, then broke and retreated in confusion toward the Antietam, pursued by the troops of Hill and Jones, until he reached the protection of his batteries on the opposite side of the river. In this attack, the brave and lamented Brigadier General L.O.B. Branch was killed, gallantly leading his brigade. It was now nearly dark, and the enemy had massed a number of batteries to sweep the approaches to the Antietam, on the other side of which the corps of General Porter had not been engaged now appeared to dispute our advance. Our troops were much exhausted and greatly reduced in numbers by fatigue and the casualties of battle. Under these circumstances, it was deemed injudicious to push our advantage further in the face of fresh troops of the enemy, much exceeding the number of our own. They were accordingly recalled and formed the line originally held by General Jones. Not to slight General McClellan, I will now read a short excerpt from his lengthy report concerning the Antietam and Maryland campaign. In it, you will note that the general calls A.P. Hill's 2,000 men massive reinforcements, when in reality Burnside outnumbered the Confederates by almost a 3-to-1 advantage. Both Union commanders always seemed to envision phantom rebel hordes facing them on the battlefield. The advance of the troops was brought on an obstinate and sanguinary contest, and from the great natural advantages of the position, it was nearly 1 o'clock before the heights on the right bank were carried. At about 3 p.m., the corps again advanced with success, the right driving the enemy before it and pushing on nearly to Sharpsburg, while the left had a hard encounter, also compelled the enemy to retire before it. The enemy here, however, were speedily reinforced and with overwhelming masses. New batteries of their artillery were also brought up and opened. It became evident that our force was not sufficient to enable the advance to reach the town, and the order was given to retire to the cover of the hill which was taken from the enemy earlier in the afternoon. This movement was effected without confusion and the position maintained until the enemy retreated. General Burnside had sent to me for reinforcements late in the afternoon, but the condition of things on the right was not such as to enable me to afford them. We are now heading north on Trough Road and are about 1 minute from intersecting River Road, where Butler's and Packhorse Ford cross the Potomac. All the Confederate forces used this route on their way to and from the battlefield at Antietam. It was also the site of the last action fought between the two armies. Again, A.P. Hill's Light Division, who were acting as the rear guard of the Confederate Army, clashed with elements of General Porter's 5th Corps, resulting in the 118th Pennsylvania Infantry Regiment suffering 269 killed or wounded, which amounted to 1/3 of the regiment's strength. It became known as the Battle of Shepherdstown. But getting back to Hill's march, I have to imagine that the footsore Confederates welcomed the cool waters of the Potomac as they made their way across the river. Unfortunately, photos of the crossing point from the time of the battle do not exist, as far as I know. But a few that were taken years later are available, and you can see the remains of the makeshift bridgeworks lying in the water. Through this old rusty gate lies Butler's Ford, where the Army of Northern Virginia crossed the Potomac River following the Battle of Antietam. Fording was made possible by a submerged solid rock ledge that runs the width of the Potomac, on which the Confederate engineers placed logs in the river to make what is referred to as a corduroy road or bridge. The first photo, which was taken years after the battle, shows the remains of the logs. Then in the great woodcut print by Thomas Nast, you can see that the cavalry swam their horses across, while in the background the infantry used the corduroy bridge to cross over. After crossing the Potomac, the men of the Light Division must have rejoiced at the perfectly flat topography of Canal Road. Unfortunately, they were only on Canal Road for about 3/4 of a mile before they turned left onto Miller Sawmill Road. Miller Sawmill Road rises in elevation nearly 200 feet in just 1.8 miles and finishes with a series of up and down humps that must have been exhausting. Just to put that into perspective, that change in elevation is the equivalent of climbing the stairs to the top of a 20-story building. All this with no rest or food during the 13.5-mile forced march from Harpers Ferry. Then, just to make things exciting, you are ordered to attack Burnside's 9th Corps, who outnumbers you by a 3-to-1 advantage. I feel that our modern military is one of the best trained and conditioned fighting forces that exists, but I'm not sure even they could repeat this feat of determination and endurance if they were asked to do it today. Unfortunately, politics has reared its ugly head, and there are elements of our society who see political advantage in demonizing all things Confederate, and I certainly do not intend to take sides. But refusing to study and understand history, whether you agree with its motives or not, is a dangerous road to go down. Remember, the first thing a dictator does when he comes to power is to destroy any history or ideas that threaten his hold over the people. A.P. Hill's Light Division's march and battlefield action was certainly one of the most amazing performances of any military force, then or now, and deserves to be recognized as such. There is a phrase that goes, "Timing is everything," and I think everyone has a story related to good or bad timing. But when it comes to famous, or if you will, infamous incidents of timing, the arrival of A.P. Hill's Light Division at exactly the right time and exactly the right place to save Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia from total destruction at the Battle of Antietam is unparalleled. Trying to predict what would or would not be the result of Hill's well-timed arrival at this particular moment in history will probably be debated for as long as people study the Civil War. It can be said that if Hill had not arrived on time, the war might have been shortened by months or even years, and hundreds of thousands of lives might have been saved. Others will argue that George McClellan probably would not have had the nerve to follow up on Burnside's success, thereby allowing Lee to regroup and escape a crushing defeat. I will leave that up to greater minds than mine. What does interest me is the Herculean effort that the men of the Light Division showed in making their march from Harpers Ferry to Sharpsburg over a route that has to be traveled to be believed. I have made this video that you might get some idea of just what was involved, in the hope that the effort, not the Confederate cause, will be remembered. Well, we are almost at the end of our travels, which will terminate at the intersection of Harpers Ferry Road and Branch Avenue, where Hill's men stopped the advance of Burnside's Ninth Corps. I hope you've enjoyed the ride.